Hello, I'm Karen Jenkins Johnson, principal of Jenkins Johnson Gallery in San Francisco and New York. Thank you for joining us. My team and I hope that you are healthy, safe, and well during these very challenging times. We welcome you to our conversation on culture, a weekly discussion during the COVID-19 pandemic with artists, curators, collectors on current art world topics. Today, we're happy to present Reto Thuring in conversation with Jae and Wadsworth Jarrell, which also marks the release of Wadsworth's new book, AfriCOBRA, Experimental Art Toward a School of Thought, which will come back and present at the end of the conversation. Reto Thuring is currently with the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. He's the Beale Family Chair of Contemporary Art and Curator of Modern Art. Prior to MFA Boston, he was at the Cleveland Museum of Art, responsible for the contemporary collection and exhibitions programming, both at the museum and the Transformer Station, an art space owned by the Bidwell Foundation in Cleveland's Ohio City neighborhood. Among the solo exhibitions curated at the museum include, of course, Jae and Wadsworth Jarrell, which, by the way, they were the first residents of Cleveland to have a solo exhibition at the Cleveland Museum of Art, which is quite historical. Congratulations, Jae and Wadsworth. Reto also had presented solo exhibitions with Kira Walker, Dan Graham, Martin Cree, and the group show with the Unicorn. Reto, a Swiss native, part of the reason why we started right at 12 o'clock today, was also an independent curator prior to joining museums, independent curator, art critic, and editor. I would like to also welcome you today, this very, very special day, to art world royalty, Jae and Wadsworth Jarrell. They're founding members of AfriCOBRA, a commune of bad, relevant artists founded in 1968 during the Black Arts Movement. This is such a treat. I'm so excited to have them here today. Of course, we also want to wish Jae an early Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day, Jae. Reto, I'm now passing it on to you. You're welcome.
Super.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Karen, for the nice introduction and really for the opportunity to sort of reconnect with Jae and Wadsworth. We've been sort of in contact over email, but this is the first time we're seeing each other again, even if virtually, since I left Cleveland, which now has almost been 2 years ago. And feels like even longer. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity to sort of like go back a bit in time, meaning like my time first, like in Cleveland, and sort of getting to know the two of you, getting to know your work better, and then together with you to go back in time even further and sort of try to kind of, go along your career and some of the important milestones, which by now has been like an incredibly impressive and in so many ways extremely productive one amongst the two of you, both incredibly accomplished artists in your own right. So I decided that I would like to sort of take the exhibition that I curated at the Cleveland Museum of Art with Wadsworth and with Jae as sort of take it as the through line through our conversation. It was a small exhibition. I'm going to show a few images of it, and it was ordered more or less chronologically, starting in the later 1960s and then all the way into the 2000s. I'm going to focus mostly on the later part of the 60s and then the early 70s, and then going to the 90s with Jae's work a bit, but I think if we take that as like the through line, we can sort of make stops along your lives and careers and talk a bit about those specific moments and not just the work itself that we're going to look at. Hope that's okay with the two of you. I'm going to do a screen share here quickly, and my computer will just take a second to get started, and then we can walk through. I want to speak a little bit about the exhibition. The starting point of the exhibition was actually an acquisition. It was a work that we acquired a year before the exhibition, a work from 1973 titled Heritage by Wadsworth Jarrell. When I started in Cleveland, I guess that's one thing that most contemporary curators, probably all curators do, is I started researching who sort of the more local art scene, and I rather quickly learned that Wadsworth and Jae were actually, that Jae was not just from Cleveland, but that she was actually, and that the two of them were actually living like basically right next door to the museum. It was literally like, I would say, a few minutes, maybe 3 minutes or so by bike. So that was, to me, an incredible sort of discovery. And after that, we came across this opportunity to acquire one of Wadsworth's really important works, which I'm showing you here. Can everyone see it? Yeah, Wadsworth. Jae, can you see it too? Good. Okay, good. But I want to start. Good. I want to start not with. I'm not going to start with this painting, but I actually want to start with a photo that we included in the exhibition, and it's this photo. I just want to sort of like give over to Wadsworth and Jae, and maybe you can explain just a little bit where we are here and who we see. And this is a photo taken by George Lewis, one of the most amazing music historians of our time, who we also invited for a lecture at the museum as part of the exhibition with Jae and Wadsworth. But can you explain a little bit what we're looking at here?
This was Richard Newhall Abrams had asked me to shoot a picture of the group for a brochure that they were having a concert with. And all the musicians gathered. This is actually in the front yard of my studio. This is a house in front of my studio. The studio was all brick and wood. It wasn't wood like that. So anyway, this is not the official photograph that they used for the brochure. This one went viral when it was published in the book. So, you know, without my son is in it, and so it was only the musicians in it for the brochure.
That's
yes, Robert Wadsworth. And yeah, and I must have shot 36 roll film of everything of the whole group, and they just picked this. They didn't pick this photograph. They picked another one for the brochure, minus my son.
Wadsworth, I mean, I think it wasn't like a coincidence that it was you who was asked to take the photo, because you had a really deep like engagement with photography, right? That was sort of like the main business you were sort of running at the time was photography. So maybe you can speak a bit about that too.
Yes, I had a dark room inside the studio where I had a mail order business, processing film and developing paper, color, black and white, everything. So it was you know, it was easy for me to make this and develop it and print them, give them a contact sheet to see what I for them to take the photograph from.
And like here in the foreground is Wadsworth Jr. and we're gonna encounter him again in one of the paintings that I'm gonna show a bit later. This is an installation image of the exhibition. When we planned it, I still remember this moment when I was sort of thinking like I've never really done an exhibition like without just kind of, you know, plain white walls. But I remember Jae and Wadsworth immediately saying, no, there are not going to be any white walls in our exhibition space. You chose those the wall colors very specifically to I think, which is sort of one of the main principles, if you will, of AfriCOBRA, which had some sort of those kind of more general principles that most artists were trying to implement and follow to some degree. So you can maybe speak a bit about that.
Our friend was very hip designer, and he talked about the fact that on the street, brothers were wearing Kool-Aid colors. And that was Bob Page speaking to us. And we thought that was so amusing, you know, to hear. He said they're out in yellows and oranges and reds, and it's just amazing, you know. And we took that as one of our first principles, that we get your attention with the Kool-Aid colors, and that's COOLADE. So that's AfriCOBRA's first principles, is that we will do it.
And
then this is, please go ahead, Wadsworth.
To add to what she said, we in the beginning we required the walls to be painted in colors when we exhibited in a museum. We started with the Studio Museum of painted walls.
And then, so this is the work I was talking about very briefly, which was sort of the acquisition for like to enter the collection that sort of preceded the exhibition itself, and it's painted in 1973, and I think it's I consider it to this point like a very sort of mature work that that sort of reflects most of the principles of AfriCOBRA, and sort of like this kind of like Wadsworth, your first years as a member of AfriCOBRA, as a painter. So maybe you can kind of expand on what you said in terms of, I think we can all see very clearly sort of the Kool-Aid colors that are very prominently featured, but there are other sort of principles that were equally important. And maybe you can speak about some of them. For example, the text. Maybe it's a bit difficult to read, but it says African rhythm, our heritage. And then if I remember correctly, I think it's Black funk and preserve our music, that sort of is spiraling out of these two Black musicians kind of heads. But so if you can maybe expand a little further, Wadsworth, on sort of what were some of these sort of like guiding principles that you were all sort of trying to agree upon and really basing your work on as well.
The painting originally was influenced or inspired by a musician that we all knew, was Jose Williams, who played, basically he played clarinet, bass clarinet and regular clarinet. And I shot a photograph of him playing. He's basically on the left side, blowing the clarinet, and in that position. And I made a great drawing of it that he owns. And when I got to DC, I decided to do a painting of it. So I added another musician. And the principles in the painting, the main one you see first, that I see first, is Carl Petai, whereas filling up complete space. There's no breathing space hardly in the painting. It's taking up the entire picture plane. And the next obvious one you see is the gold and tinfoil that I applied to it, that's representative of Jae. That was one of our principles. And also the text, of course, what we call writing on the picture or writing on the plane, which is one of the principles. So, and doing an image for AfriCOBRA, it was not required to use all 12 principles. I think it's 13, and but some of them, make sure that we included some of the principles. So this one is incorporated quite a few of the principles in it.
And so the next image I'm going to share here is an installation of like sort of like the first wall with three paintings. On the very from my view on the right is a portrait. Then Nasa, and I'm going to show images of that, and then Black family. So really the earliest painting we included was this portrait of Jae that Wadsworth painted around 1966. It's I wrote my PhD on Italian portraiture of like the 16th century, but I'm not exaggerating by saying this is to this date one of the most beautiful portraits I've ever seen in my life. I find it absolutely beautiful, and find it interesting how sort of like this predates sort of the founding years of AfriCOBRA by around 2-3 years. But I think you can already see that some of the sort of the principles and some of those kind of stylistic marks that you're developing down the road and that become more articulated can already be found in this painting. So, can you speak a little bit about sort of like, because I know like when we looked at that painting together, you were a bit resistant sort of at first to include it in the exhibition. But I truly think it's an absolutely incredible work. So maybe you can speak a bit about it.
Okay, this is back in the day when I was using oils, and I was experimenting with stripes. And there's a painting I did called Cockfight, and these kind of stripes and applications in it, you know, different colors. And I decided, you know, now this was that period, so I brought it into this portrait here. And some of the things I'm doing is, it's sort of related to the technique or the approach out in the right of her head. This is one of the moves that I made in a lot of paintings at that period. And you know, so it's more, it's not as much color as I normally use. And, you know, a lot of people would be surprised that as much white in it as it is. And most of the paintings I did had full color, as you can see, like the one you saw with at the museum. But this one is more open, and it's different finish than I normally finish a painting. But it worked, it's successful, like it is.
And Jae, because this is you in the painting, and ultimately, right, the reason why this exhibition came about, and was because you two, or maybe one of the reasons this exhibition came about was because you literally sort of like live right next to the museum now. This is because of you, because you were born in Cleveland. So I'm wondering, can you just speak a little bit about sort of like how you, like between like the years in Cleveland until the years sort of like you met, and where you met, which would then sort of like bring us to this painting, which was painted shortly after you got married in 1967, if I'm right.
The import to me was I liked the patterns that he had discovered, and he was on a roll at that time. The cockfight was humongous in size, and was of those swirls, and you could just sense the fight because the feathers were flying and the circles were going, and they were really, really fighting, and it was beautiful. And then I remember the honeymoon once we were hosted in a really nice hotel, and it had a veranda, and it also had an upstairs porch and draw them as they went down the street, and just get to articulate the environment and the look of the town. It was warm, and people were always going up and down the street. We chose not to be in a major American-like hotel. We wanted a guest house where we would be amongst the people, and so that was interesting. And when he started the portrait, I was quite amazed that he brought this element of charm into identifying, his mate. So I was quite privileged. Thank you.
So going back to this wall, sort of like we started with a portrait of Jae, a portrait of Nassau, where you went for your honeymoon after you got married, and then the next painting was Black Family, which is your first painting, Wadsworth, as a sort of like after AfriCOBRA was officially founded. It's also, I think, your first painting in acrylic, so that's sort of like the switch from oil to acrylic, and then this, so it's like the two of you two. It was important for, I think, for us, the three of us, to sort of start with like the two of you as a couple going to this image of a sort of the nucleus, like that Black family, but then also speaking about them. And I would love to hear how you would sort of describe this about AfriCOBRA as a sort of extended family. This is very much how you thought about yourselves as a group, right? Like that you were sort of an extended family, and this is how you operated, and this is how you debated, and this is how you sort of like supported each other way beyond just like your individual kind of careers and aspirations as artists.
Are you speaking to me?
Yeah, I would love to hear like how you would sort of explain it like a bit further, sort of like the idea of like AfriCOBRA as a sort of a group that like expanded from a smaller circle to a larger circle, but how you thought about that group in relation to sort of like your sort of your moral principles about like the importance of family.
At the time, there was so much turbulence in the city, and around the world, around the America that we know, and we were dealing with providing work that might give a sort of leadership position to artists, as opposed to the global leaders and the vocal leaders that were constantly on the news, giving strength to the people and masses. And it was beautiful, this organization of artists, so that we could address issues that to to our people. And at this point, we had been just theorizing every Sunday afternoon and bringing work that we had been doing on our own in, but we hadn't started any of our projects. We turned to, at one point, we received an invitation to from a TV program to exhibit our work. And we thought, oh, we're going to have to do something very principled to get ready for that. And as a parent, I was particularly concerned that we took a leadership role for our family and for our child. And it thought that was a good principle. It turned out that we chose to do Black family. And we have a variety of expressions in Black families, but it was wonderful for that to be a jump-off point for AfriCOBRA. As a new parent, I was really concerned that we could do some leadership that always included our families, as opposed to just popular art.
So this is, I'm just going to explain, so this is again a portrait of you, Jae. Here it's, this is Wadsworth Jr. And these two figures, Wadsworth, you sort of like, I think you based the picture of the image of the girl from a photo that you found, or and the sort of the or is it the man, and like the other image is basically invented from you just invented, is that right?
The girl was invented, and the man he was a brother I saw standing up about a couple of blocks up the street on Stony Island with his foot on a fire plug. And it was a beautiful pose. And I asked him, could I shoot a picture of it? And he said I could, and I shot the picture, and that's what that's from. I had a picture for years of something like 20 by 30 by 40 blow up of that picture. But that's where the male came from, the man. So the girl was invented. And then I'm using a variety of media in there, which I don't acknowledge. I use the word acrylic on canvas. It's got hot wax, and it's got pastel in the left corner of behind the man's head. You'll see the pastel and hot wax are used to get a degree of translucency. And I only use that in the first two paintings, the two assignments that we agreed to do. It was Black family. So, and I got away from the hot wax, and the beads I'm using, of course, is from the term that was popular at the time, Black is Beautiful. And at the time, they are just sort of extraneously located in the painting. They are not used as facets to turn the plane, turn the form in it of anything. So that came later. So, and so anyway, I decided to use different sizes of these as one person said, which was Jeff Donaldson, said, if you think the smaller sizes. She said, you think this is big, look at this one. So they got bigger and they got bigger.
So we got the, I'm looking and there was a question, which I think sort of like for the previous pictures we looked at or what we talked about, which was how was it like for a young, so it was like, how was it like for a young Black couple, but you only met in Chicago, but how was it like for for you, Jae, to in the 60s to grow up in Cleveland, and how did that influence your work?
Always had an artistic preference. There are fine creators here that beyond art do furniture, do building, things of that sort. But it's a beautiful city, and it starts with good concert halls, and performances are very important here. And so it's been a colorful beginning for schools and for families to partake in. But it also has a good theater district, and it's a joyous place. And so there's much performance as you grow up, and your taste buds are really whet by by taking in these things. And the school system made sure that we experienced these wonderful contributions. So that was a strength in Cleveland. The school bus would roll up and we'd be off to Severance Hall, if not there, to the Shakespearean Playhouse. It was, the sky was the limit, and what children were exposed to at a very young age.
I think if I remember correctly, you said it was also on a school trip that you went to the museum for the first time, right?
Oh yes, we went full spectrum to engage the kids in knowing what their city offered. But families did this because it was so advertised in daily papers and in news programs, so that you were aware something was happening, something worth including, and fairs and exciting places to go outside of the city too, to enjoy the beauty of the city and all it had to offer, and particularly celebrating holidays and all. There was so much to take in, and a variety of opportunities to do it.
So Wadsworth, I think we received two questions that go in the same direction, which is sort of like who influenced you as a painter?
Who influenced me as a painter? In the beginning, when I first, I really didn't take influences until when I was young growing up. There was no art. There was a gallery, a museum the university had, but it was closed to Black people, but it was not open to the public really until 1948. But that, the art when I was coming up was magazines and things like that. That didn't really influence me. When I started taking formal art at the School of the Art Institute, then that's when I was observing people that influenced me, like Elzea Cartour with the elongation of his figures, and some of the not necessarily techniques, but the ambience and everything of Archibald Motley's work. For one reason, they were Chicago-based artists, I suppose, but they was not living there at the time. But those was my influences. And after I started to the Institute, and I was, of course, influenced by European artists greatly, you know, like Cezanne, and especially Lautrec and Bazin was heavy influence in my work. And an instructor named Leroy Neiman, some of his work I was instructed by his approach. And, you know, some of that was very influential in my work. And the music around Chicago was loaded with jazz. All of this was factored into me making art, and still is, actually.
And so speaking a little further about like influence, can you explain a bit more in detail how, you know, how these, like how AfriCOBRA sort of met as a group? Like Jae, you mentioned, like, so Black family was sort of like the first kind of theme that you gave yourself, right? So the idea was like you kind of chose a theme together, and then each of you, like in your individual style, would sort of like work on that theme and try to come up with a work. If I'm sort of describing this correctly, but then can you speak a little more about sort of how these convenings took place and how you sort of like critiqued each other to really with like the intention to kind of further each of your work each time you sort of like you came together, and I think you said like you would debate hours and hours. So the debating and discussions were as much part of the sort of AfriCOBRA as was the actual making of art.
Yes, people would come, it would bring current events that may be happening worldwide that might influence Black focus, the relativity of conditions that we might experience, or either some that were far more crucial and silencing it, you know, far away. You sort of thought, wow, this is big. But then there were the heroes that were the leadership in different nations in Africa, and we were really influenced to parallel some of our conditions or to parallel our results and our resolve of those conditions. And so it was just interesting to chat all Sunday afternoon or bring some evidence of newsworthy information and some things that might inspire you to take that path in making a piece of art. And it would perhaps its beginning sketches or all might appear in a following Sunday where folks know that you were articulating something that we might use for AfriCOBRA. We were not at that point until we did Black Family, working on the actual pieces that we intended to take to our first exhibit. And we had been together almost 2 years before we did Black Family. So we put in time Sunday afternoons. And so it wasn't the work that was going to appear in AfriCOBRA 1 necessarily, but it was things that energized you to create and just bring it into what you think of this, you know. And we had honest and very good and positive critiquing that was really a worthwhile experience, so that we really look forward to sharing, you know, sharing something unfinished, so that we might hear some praise and maybe some directions, and just free form. But when it gets down to when the rubber meets the road and you have a show date, it is an exciting experience to bring the work there. It's almost boastful. You can't wait to bring it to see where they might evaluate it. And it's great to hear the voices. And that was one thing that I really enjoyed in school, was critique. It is a very powerful contribution. It's better than being holed up in the studio, just focusing on all you know. And for those who know a lot, that's one thing, or are very creative. And for those who might be at a stalemate, it's a little painful. So it was beautiful to come with Sunday afternoon chats with a few snacks and a wonderful way to spend the day.
So I did forget to mention this to the full audience when I started, and I want to apologize for them. If you want to use the Q&A function to drop your questions, I'll check that regularly, and so I can pick up questions you all might have for Jae or Wadsworth. And Wadsworth, one question that came in was you mentioned that you took a photo of the man in Black family and based the depiction of him in your painting. But did photography beyond that play an important role for your painting practice?
Yes. I was working in commercial art as a photographer. I did photography not in photography studios, but in advertising studios. So that was that was my livelihood, really. And I studied commercial art at the School of Art Institute. Actually, that's what I majored in, and it's commercial art, you know. So, but the Art Institute is not a school like some of the commercial schools that taught commercial art. You know, Institute was a fine art school, and everything was a fine art approach. So you took a lot of drawing and painting and design, just like as if you was going to be a painter. So this is what I took from it, from the Institute, was that kind of education. And but photography was my life, you know, is what I did. And then later I got into mail order business, where I had a processing company in the studio and processing film for people all over the country and all over the world, matter of fact. And that's me in photography. I don't do much now, but that's what I did back in the day.
a work from 2017, Jae, that you made. And it's sort of a sculptural work, but on it there's a photo of a work from 1970, Brothers Surrounding Cis. And one thing that ever since I met the two of you, I've been thinking about how radical in so many ways your approach was. To sort of come together as this group to develop those principles, but then also to sort of try to convene a message that was a positive message to empower others to sort of follow your lead and to sort of put that message out as to support your communities, which I think that's what sort of we're trying to serve. But if I take that one step further and I think about you, Jae, as a Black woman in the 1960s, and then on top of that, you sort of take fashion and clothing, you pick that as your medium. It's very, I can't even get there in terms of how radical that sort of choice, your weapon of choice, must have felt and been, and how difficult it must have been for you too to sort of gain recognition and be accepted. Just because that, even in sort of the normal, whatever, what already was sort of accepted, if you will, right? And part of the canon art circles, fashion and clothing wasn't sort of part of the discourse. So can you tell me how that must have been?
I've always been interested in fashion because my grandfather was a tailor, and I knew much about sewing, and my mother took a real leadership role in introducing me to his skills, though I never met him. He had passed by the time I was born. But it was wonderful to do real good workmanship, and she guided me with that. And then my eyes were open for some of the artistic methods of doing work. And I took training in junior high and high school, and received the sewing award. So I felt confident in things that I do, and began to do work for, had been asked to do work for others, and went about doing that as a way of making a bit of a living while in college, and also when I stepped out for a while after the 2 years of my training in Bowling Green State University. And of course, that was training to become a teacher. And so it was all academic. And I enjoyed that a lot. And then at some point, I decided I was going to be a designer. And I knew of no schools that were in our area to direct me. And so after I made a choice to go to New York, and when I was in New York, I wanted to go to school there. But at best, I took in all the jazz I could, and sightseeing and all, and working. And I saw that I was going to need to get to a better budget that would take me to Boston to live, and choose where I wanted to get this training. It ended after I stayed in Boston 2 years that I chose the Art Institute of Chicago. And in so doing, I was, as a transfer student, you do the core courses in the beginning. And I was thrilled with being introduced to painting and design, and not fashion design, just simply good design, with the use of space and textures. And so it was an important move for me, being in Chicago again and being able to pursue what was happening around that city. It was such an active city, and there was a real hunger for someone who could make good garments. And so that is how I sort of paid my way in school as I was there. And I was fortunate enough to have a number of fashion oriented people who wanted to model, and I would create work for them. So I had a lot of practice before I decided that I would go into business. And I had a debut show, and after that I was asked to be in Ebony Fashion Fair, and, or a garment of mine was chosen for it. And next thing you knew, in a year later, I opened my shop, Jae of Hyde Park. So I've always been little egotistical, and I always hang my name on on anything I do, and so you won't forget. And so that was a marvelous way of reaching my desires, and I was happy with it. And I found it interesting to get some helpers there who would do handwork, and I had 3 12th grade students that were in one of the schools that really focused on some fashion, and I think it was Dunbar, and those girls, it was great to have 3 rather than 1, because it's competitive, and it makes them, they were very handwork conscious. But as we critiqued who was the best at the hemming, that person got that job, and they would vote, they vote that that's the person who does the finishing. And they each had real beautiful skills. One of them buttonhole making by hand, and that was her specialty, and another one of pleating, and it was just great to have the 3 of them, because it made them happy and made them have a coalition, and they knew good workmanship when they turned it out, and we'd critique and it'd be fine. But they were very productive and stayed with me 3 years.
So thank you, Jae, and I think you have all right to put your name on anything you do, always. We received a number of questions, so I want to be really mindful of the time here. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm just going to pick a few questions that we received and read them out to you. The first one is, how did living in Chicago during the many events of 1968 provide the impetus for forming AfriCOBRA?
Chicago at the time was, first place, it's a very political city. And you had precinct captains walking to your house, knocking on your door, asking you to vote at 7 o'clock at night. It wasn't coming in the mail like you get in most cities. Politicians mail literally to for you to vote for them. These people came and made sure you voted and asked you if you had a ride. They would furnish a ride for you to the voting poll. So, and it was an exciting city. There was lots of everything going on with the King brought his civil rights movement there, and it was exciting time. The Muslims was there, but Malcolm X regularly visiting Chicago. It's hard to tell somebody, to make them understand 50 years, 40, 50 years ago. I mean, you hate to say this, but it's almost like you have to be there and to really understand what was going on, the excitement going on with Chicago at the time. And that was very influential in what we did, all of us, you know, was Chicago.
So there's another question. So I'm going to add this to your answer, Wadsworth, which is, I live in Atlanta. Curious if either of you still feel a connection to Atlanta or Georgia. And then a follow-up question: any upcoming shows there? But so you did move. So Jae, you moved from Cleveland to Chicago, which is where you met. Then you I think went to Atlanta and then New York, and did you go back to? And then from New York back to Cleveland, basically. So can you speak a little bit about your time in Atlanta and then New York as well?
Atlanta was a fabulous place to be. We had a Black mayor, Maynard Jackson, and he was a leader and a half. And he saw to it that that we had parks that were beautiful, that we used them, and that we had good music there, and particularly jazz. And so you would see free concerts in the park and bring your picnic, and it was just wonderful. But he did a focus on making sure that there were good art venues and shows where, you know, it was an art fair type place that had artists taking booths and providing new work, their new work there. And also it was a week long, and so people all got a chance to go visit all of them and go back again. But it was an enriched place with good education. And I was joyous because I taught in the school that educated our children. And this was a private school. And I was fortunate enough to be in a responsible position as a teacher of art to children from 4 years old to the end of 5th grade. So it was a joyous, beautiful place that our children were invited to attend. And they, you know, it was just a good, positive kind of direction with a good headmaster, good mayor, just good city, and many, many dear friends that we still hold dear.
And to add to that, they had great galleries there that I was showing with the top gallery there, which was Fay Gold's at the time. And I got a lot of recognition there. I was able to get my prices up to a reasonable price when I lived there. And, you know, my name was like a household word in Atlanta for a moment in the art business. It was a great place. First place I've sold this many paintings to African Americans out of my studio, just people who didn't like to buy from dealers that would come to my studio and buy. And these was doctors and different people who wanted to, African Americans who wanted to buy art, and some of them from collections.
And another thing too that was good about my school experience was that our children were among the very few that were integrating that school, and it was a huge school from K through 12 and on 85 acres, and so it was no joke. But I was put into a position of leadership because of my skills previously with AfriCOBRA and the concerns of community and families being justly served. And so I was able to bring that into that curriculum there, as well as encourage other teachers to apply to bring more Black imagery and influence in the lives of those children that are attending that school.
Good. So it's to the dot. It's 4 p.m. So I think Karen is going to say something at the end, but I did want to say that I received this book like this morning by mail. Wadsworth, you shared with me some chapters previously by email, but I just want to point out how great of an accomplishment this is. I only sort of flipped through this morning. I certainly haven't read the full book, but this is certainly something for everyone. If you have the time, maybe you have a bit more time now even than usual, to sort of like read through and to sort of like go much deeper on terms of like what we just talked about. And it's an amazing accomplishment. And I want to sort of end by really congratulating both of you, but really sort of like take this one, because I think this is like really just came out. It actually still smells like new from the press, Duke University Press. So everyone, please read this. It's a enormous. There's an enormous wealth of knowledge and experience, and some really, really interesting things in terms of like you both, your perspectives on being artists now for the last 40, almost 50 years. So thank you for being with us today, and I'm really grateful to Wadsworth and Jae that you shared some of your thinking with us today. Thank you very much.
Yes, I wanted to come back in here and also thank you, Reto, for hosting this. We've been talking about this for a while, and it was actually supposed to take place here in San Francisco during the opening reception of Jae and Wadsworth exhibition, which we will reschedule. But today, May 8th, AfriCOBRA Experimental Art Toward a School of Thought. This book is also available in hardcover, and with a foreword by Richard May III and a review by Kelly Jones of Columbia University. And it also has a wonderful introduction, and it has the AfriCOBRA principles and philosophies and several images as well of Wadsworth's practice, along with AfriCOBRA members and detail and writings on them. So please visit our website to place an order for a signed hard copy. We have a limited number available that will be signed. So our website is www.jenkinsjohnsongallery.com. And on that note, I will say again, Jae and Wadsworth, it has been a real treat to have you in conversation with Reto. You are a beautiful couple, been married for many decades, and your love and is coming through, and warmth is coming through as a couple and as individuals. And I just want to thank you for taking that mantle in 1968 and starting your movement. You've influenced many artists over the generations, and it's such a pleasure to know you. You are art world royalty, and Reto, thank you again. And peace, happy Mother's Day, Jae, and may you all be safe and well, and hug your families, call your friends, and be well. Good night.
Night.